Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because we're going to untangle one of the absolute most fascinating dilemmas in criminal law, the concept of jurisdiction. I know, jurisdiction sounds incredibly dry, right? But I promise you, by the end of this, you'll see how this single legal concept is literally the difference between criminals facing justice or walking free on a technicality. We'll be looking at how a nation's legal power operates, where it stops, and those wild, exceptional moments when it reaches far, far beyond its borders. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the territoriality principle, cover the exceptions to that rule, and look closely at Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code. Then we'll get into the landmark case of People v. Tulin, explore piracy and universal jurisdiction, and finally, look beyond our borders. Now, I want you to hold a specific scenario in your head. Just picture this. A crime occurs completely outside standard national borders, let's say in international waters, right in the middle of the ocean. Who exactly steps in? Who actually has the power to arrest, prosecute, and punish the offenders? Is it the country where the ship is registered? The country where the victims are from? Or is it just a lawless void where anything goes? This is the ultimate jurisdictional nightmare. And to solve it, we first have to understand the absolute baseline foundation of criminal law. Section 1. The Territoriality Principle, the baseline rule. The Territoriality Principle states that the penal laws of the Philippines are enforceable only within its physical territory. This is the bedrock rule of the justice system. A sovereign state obviously has the obligation and the right to uphold its laws and maintain order, but that power is strictly limited by geography. If a crime is committed within the Philippine archipelago, its atmosphere, its interior waters, or its maritime zone, Philippine law applies. But if it happens completely outside those borders, generally speaking, Philippine courts do not have the power to step in. It's a hard geographic line. To back this up, we look to Article 14 of the Civil Code. It specifically dictates that penal laws and laws of public security and safety are obligatory upon all who live or sojourn in Philippine territory. Notice that word there, sojourn. That basically means it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or just a foreigner visiting on a quick vacation. If you are physically standing inside the territory, you are bound by its criminal laws. You absolutely cannot claim that your home country's laws should apply to you instead. You're in the territory, you follow the rules. Section 2. Exceptions to the rule, beyond the borders. Now, what's really interesting about this is that if territory was the absolute, unbreakable limit of the law, a criminal could just stand, say, 1 inch past the border and do whatever they wanted, right? Well, that brings us to Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code. It reiterates that baseline rule of territoriality, but it adds a massive caveat. It says the laws apply except as provided in the treaties and laws of preferential application. This means international treaties, like visiting forces agreements, for example, can actually create situations where someone inside the country might be exempt from its jurisdiction, subject to the broader principles of public international law. Section 3, Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code, Extraterritorial Reach. Beyond treaties, the law provides incredibly specific exceptions for extraterritoriality, meaning prosecuting acts that happened entirely outside the country. Consider these scenarios from Article 2. If someone commits a crime on a Philippine ship or airship, even if that vessel is way out in international waters, the vessel is essentially considered a floating extension of the national territory. Furthermore, if someone is sitting in a foreign country forging Philippine currency or bringing those forged notes into the Philippines, they can be prosecuted. The underlying logic here is pure self-defense. The state has to protect its economic and political life from attacks, even when those attacks originate from beyond its shores. Section 4. Case Study, People v. Tulin, a real-world application from GR No. 11709, decided on August 30, 2001. Let's see how all this legal theory builds into a real-world, high-seas, true crime scenario. Here is the absolutely harrowing timeline of People v. Tulin. Heavily armed pirates intercepted and boarded a Philippine-operated cargo vessel, the MT Tabangao, while it was sailing near Mindoro. Once aboard, they detained the crew, totally took over the ship, changed its identity, and forced it to sail toward Singapore. Finally, days later, they met up with another vessel, the Navy Pride, and transferred a massive amount of the stolen cargo right over to it. When the perpetrators were eventually caught and charged under the anti-piracy and anti-highway robbery law, the defense came up with a really clever legal challenge. One of the accused basically looked at the territoriality principle we just talked about and argued, wait a minute, the specific acts I'm being accused of, transferring the cargo, happened way out near Singapore. That is completely outside Philippine waters. Therefore, Philippine courts have absolutely no jurisdiction to punish me.
Section 5, Piracy and Universal Jurisdiction, solving the puzzle.
It's a fascinating defense, right? I mean, geographically, he had a point, but to solve this, the Supreme Court completely shut down that argument with a very powerful doctrine. So the crucial point is this. Piracy is an exceptional offense with extraterritorial or universal dimensions. You see, in legal history, a pirate is known as hostis humanum generis, an enemy of all mankind. Because of this, piracy isn't bound by your standard 3-mile limit of territorial waters. It is essentially viewed as a crime against humanity itself. Furthermore, the court emphasized the concept of a continuing crime. You cannot just take a magnifying glass, isolate one single overseas act, like transferring cargo near Singapore, and separate it from the whole grand scheme. The violent seizure of the vessel began within Philippine jurisdiction near Mindoro. Everything that happened after that, even outside territorial waters, was all part of the exact same continuing piracy enterprise. The crime physically moved, yes, but the jurisdiction attached to the entirety of that criminal act from the moment it started.
Section 6, Beyond Our Borders, the Modern Reach. We've seen how extraterritoriality applies to high-seas piracy, but how does this concept work today? And this brilliantly illustrates the whole divide. On one side, you have your standard domestic crimes, like local theft, which are subject strictly to territorial jurisdiction. You commit the crime here, you get tried here. On the other side, we have extraterritorial crimes. These are those exceptional offenses where the law simply has to extend beyond normal borders to protect the state and its people.
Just look at how this concept has evolved in the modern era. Under Section 49 of the Anti-Terrorism Act, Philippine jurisdiction stretches far across the globe. It applies to Filipino citizens committing penalized acts entirely outside the country. It also applies to individuals who are physically outside the country but orchestrating crimes inside the Philippines or committing crimes directly against the Philippine government. The law has adapted. It realizes that today, a state's political and economic life can be severely threatened by someone sitting behind a computer screen on the exact opposite side of the planet. Which brings us to a final, provocative thought. We started with the strict, hard lines of a map, the territoriality principle. But through the exceptions in Article 2 of the Penal Code, the continuing enterprise of piracy in People v. Tulin, and modern anti-terrorism laws, we see those map lines completely blurring. So as our world, and our crimes, become increasingly borderless, how far can, and more importantly, how far should a nation's laws truly reach? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this helped you understand the fascinating reach of the long arm of the law.